Muchas gracias, Nacho. Muy buenos días a todos y espero que estén disfrutando de este tercer y último día del coloquio número 57 en la ciudad de Buenos Aires. Hemos escuchado charlas muy interesantes durante la mañana de hoy y espero complementarias a la que vamos a escuchar en los próximos minutos. Let me switch to English now to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Tyler Cowen. Tyler is a PhD in economics from Harvard University, professor at George Mason University, co-author of one of the best economic blogs, The Marginal Revolution, and a columnist at Bloomberg. Taylor, with more than 15 books written, he's one of the most leading voices on innovation and transformation. And in addition, he has been a close bond to Argentina. He has come to the country on several times, and he has confessed he's a huge fan of chinchulines. So good morning, Taylor. Good to talk to you today. We can't hear Taylor.
Good morning. Good to see you all. Thank you.
Loud and clear now. Good morning, Taylor. So we have a lot of topics to cover in a short period of time, and I would like to start talking about the private sector. We had earlier today interesting discussions about the role of the private sector, the interaction between private sector and public sector, and I would like to get your views on the role of private companies in the society and the role those private companies can play on the development of a country like Argentina.
Right now, we are living in a world of big business. I am giving this talk over Zoom, of course, which is a big business. During the pandemic, I ordered my food through Amazon. It was delivered reliably every single day. So I think the future for countries moving forward are the countries that have successful, scalable, big businesses with the resources and talent to make a difference. And this, I think, is fundamentally different than 10 years ago. We are seeing large enterprises really being the institutions that can get things done.
That's clear. And what do you think those companies in Argentina, in the context of a country that is a world developer and exporter of commodities, but also of services, can play in this interaction between public and private sector?
I think in Latin America, more generally, there have not been enough startups, not been enough online commerce. But the last 2 or 3 years, I have seen a breakthrough. There are many dysfunctional economic sectors in Latin America and Argentina, and you now have startups that are supplying these goods and services much better than the older businesses did. And this is great. This is the first step. But the next step will be to build big businesses and startups that are not just filling in for dysfunctionalities locally, but that are actually either world-class or South American-class companies that have real scale across all of Latin America and possibly sell into North America and Europe. And I very much believe this will happen. But that is the variable I would be looking at in assessing the prospects of both Argentina, Brazil, and Latin America more generally.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tyler. One of the subjects that is bringing the attention of most of world leaders today is climate change, something we discussed yesterday on different occasions. Would be great to get your views on the progress or lack of progress made so far, and if you see the fight against climate change as a way to reach sustainable growth.
Well, I don't think we're making a lot of progress. We're making progress in the science. So solar power and wind power, they are cheaper. But still, about 80% of the global energy supply comes from fossil fuels. Right now, we have supply chain problems. Natural gas, it is much more expensive. The price of coal is being bid up. We are seeing voters in most countries preferring cheap energy to green energy. So this, for me, is a very pessimistic sign. I don't see the countries of the world really moving toward sustainable green energy. But the good news is, first, a revival of interest in nuclear power. And second, on the science side, really significant progress with electric cars, many other areas. So I think ultimately we will do it, but only after great pain and problems of transition. So far, we are failing.
Any advice you can give to the companies in Argentina to move forward to reduce their carbon footprints in the race to the net zero?
Well, this may sound counterintuitive, but my advice to Argentina is not to be in the lead. You are too small of a country. It will depend first and foremost on China, then on India, then on the United States, and also on Europe. So probably Argentina should be a free rider. I understand the problem behind that reasoning, but it will not depend on Argentina. So
that's clear, Tyler. One thing that also brought the attention of the audience today is the pace of change of innovation. And over the past few years, we can agree that have accelerated dramatically. Do you think this is changing the macroeconomic environment, helping to get a more dynamic economic development?
The biggest advances, in my opinion, are coming in biomedicine. The most concrete example is the vaccines, which really have changed everything for all the countries that have access to them. It has enabled a more rapid recovery than anyone expected. But I think the vaccines are only one symptom of a much larger breakthrough. I think we will successfully tackle malaria, sickle cell anemia, in time, cancer. So I think in the area of health and public health, we, over the next 20 years, will see greater advances in this period than maybe any other. And it won't always drive measured economic growth, but it will make actual human lives much longer, better, and happier. And what we're seeing is scientists everywhere have access to extreme computing power that enables them to innovate, and they communicate across the globe using social media, the internet. And this is just a phenomenal set of developments that we are living through and should cherish.
And when you look forward 10 years' time, what sort of new technologies, you provided an example of one, do you see flourishing in that period of time? What other technologies do you think will help to change the world in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, on the scientific side, again, green energy, electric cars, solar power and wind power, 10 to 15% cheaper every year. The question is, when will we pay the costs of integrating those advances into our energy infrastructure? And that's a little hard to predict. I think it is later than many people think. They're too entranced by the science. The real dysfunction when it comes to energy is politics. But also smaller, safer, more manageable nuclear reactors are already a reality. They may be used first in Vietnam or Africa, but I think they will transform the world. So I think in many areas, the original promise of the internet is now paying off by easing scientific communication. And the internet is not just Facebook or email, but it's the whole world being tied together in this advanced network of scientific knowledge.
Thank you, Tyler. Changing the subject, geopolitics is probably one of the topics also that it's top on the world agenda. What geopolitical risk do you see as the most relevant one for the years to come?
Well, the biggest political risk for much of Latin America is that Chinese growth will slow down due to a housing bubble bursting and bad demographics, and the commodities-driven growth that you have enjoyed for many years, that may well be at an end. I'm not sure that India will step in to maintain that pace. So I think Latin America maybe has lost about 10 years of economic growth due to the pandemic. There's a lot to patch up and fix. It will feel like a very difficult time. The world in some ways is ignoring you more than before. I hope this is a healthy development and that when no one is looking, these new middle classes that so many Latin countries have built up really start governing and demanding accountability from leaders and bring in better policies. Their startup scenes finally are blossoming. I would say I am cautiously optimistic. There's incredible talent in Argentina and around the continent, but really some major obstacles facing you in the immediate short run.
That's an interesting view. And within that context about geopolitics, the role of the region and Argentina, what do you think Argentina within the region, within the Latin American region, what's the role to play, right? So what should be the positioning of Argentina within our Latin American region?
Well, I think you have some major advantages right now. So if I compare Argentina with Chile, Chile historically has had sounder, better organized institutions. But Argentina has had more creative innovators and leaders, especially in culture. I like to say that Borges and Cortázar, they are your original unicorns. And you don't find a comparably strong performance from the other Latin American countries. So I think in an age of startups and innovation, your natural cultural strengths are going to matter much more than they did, say, 20 years ago. And even in the Argentinian national character, there's a kind of boldness or putting forth the individual that I think is stronger in Argentina than most other Latin countries. And I think that perfectly matches an age of tech where the heroes are people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos. So I think in spite of all the recent economic chaos, financial and currency problems, culturally, you're maybe better positioned than you might think.
Taylor, you have written 15 books so far. I know you're working in a new book. By the way, one other question for later would be, how do you find the time to do all what you do? And the new book you're working with Daniel Gross will be released in May next year, and I understand it's in relation to talent. That's a great topic. That's a great topic that it's exacerbated by the pandemic. And as you know, and you referred to that, in Argentina there are 11 unicorns. When you add the value of those companies, the market cap of those companies today, it's probably beyond the $120 billion. And that happened in a country with a lot of volatility on its economic environment. Is that something that calls your attention?
Yes, my book is about how can we do a better job finding and evaluating talent. And I think also on this dimension, I see a lot of possibilities for Argentina. Your talent is so centralized in Buenos Aires. This has some major advantages, but it means that in the rest of the country, probably a lot of young talent is still going undiscovered. You know, say in northern Argentina, you don't have the same networking opportunities that you do in the capital. So I think as Argentina and other countries get better at talent, the countries here I'm most optimistic about are Argentina and Mexico for finding hidden talent. I think they have great potential. Whereas in Chile, which is fairly evenly developed, if you grow up in Concepcion, the chance you end up in a good position, that's already pretty decent. So their upside on the talent question, I think, is lower than yours.
That's interesting. And talking about talent in the COVID or probably post-COVID environment, what do you think will be the new way of working, right? This work from home or return to the office or the hybrid model, how do you think this will end up being?
I think work from home will be transformative. So in the near future, for a job, you will be, for many jobs, competing against the entire rest of the world, everyone else. So people who are talented will earn much more because they can work anywhere. But people who are like a little better than average, who might have done fine, they will find the competition much tougher. So I think this means in Argentina and Latin America, much more English will be learned fluently. But also when you speak Spanish, you will speak Spanish more like other Latin American countries, and there will be some convergence on common ways of speaking Spanish, because so often you will be working in other places using Zoom and other online methods. So culturally, economically, this will be transformative. You'll either do much better or some fair amount worse. I use the saying, average is over.
It seems that boundaries are not that important today, given the COVID situation and the reaction and the working from home, as you described. You know, when you look at high-cost locations from a labor perspective and low-cost locations and the possibility that everyone can work for any other place, where do you see the balance between developing countries and more developed countries?
Right now, I think the greatest source of untapped talent is India and South Asia. English is commonly spoken. The internet connections are good enough. So for talented individuals, I think that is the number one place. But again, within a Latin American context, I am quite optimistic about Argentina's most talented people because I think culturally they are very good at putting themselves forward. And this is very important when you need to be proactive in terms of signaling or showing your talent to the rest of the world. And you're not just being hired by someone you went to high school with. It is true work at a distance. You're in a pretty good time zone also. That will become a significant advantage. So good climate in most of the country. Again, I think there are just enormous opportunities for Argentina in the next 10 years, or at least parts of it.
I read an interesting interview on a local newspaper last Sunday that you gave to one of our top journalists, and you mentioned that our first unicorns in Argentina were not Mercado Libre and the companies we know. Those were Borges, Sarmiento, Sabato, and Piazzolla. So you seem to have a deep knowledge on our local culture. Where this comes from?
Well, I visited Argentina numerous times. I have done my best to learn Spanish. I've had various friends from Argentina. I just think it's a very important place to understand for the future of our world. It has, many features of the best of Europe. It still has modernism. People in Argentina still do psychoanalysis. You've had booms, you've had busts, you've had corrupt governments, financial crises. You were globalized very early on. To me, it's simply a fascinating history and culture. And again, your cultural creators are just at the absolute top. Borges is maybe my favorite writer. Ficciones. And, I've had a great time there each time I visited Argentina.
Tyler, it seems inflation is picking up in the world, right?
Yes.
The price in commodities, there is a new dynamic there, and the world has not been seeing inflation picking up for a long, long time, something that we know well in Argentina, and we know how to manage inflation, but that's not necessarily the case in the rest of the markets across the Americas or in the other continents. How do you see inflation evolving, and what do you think will be the reaction of the regulators and central banks?
I think the short run will be worse than people think, but 3 years from now, it will be a memory. So it is mostly supply-side shocks coming to energy, to ports, to transportation, and also to high-quality semiconductor chips, all at the same time. Plus, there are labor shortages because after COVID, people are rethinking what they want to do with their lives, their jobs. Not enough workers anywhere. Again, all at the same time. But these are problems that markets are pretty good at solving, and the higher prices are part of the solution. Some countries will see recessions. Their central banks will need to tighten. The United States, our Fed, is behind the curve, I would say slowly waking up. But I actually think we'll get through this one. And if you look at, say, the borrowing rate on 10-year U.S. Treasuries, that rate, last I looked, was yesterday, it was 1.53, which is still pretty low. So I think we will manage this crisis.
Right. Thank you, Tyler. So you have in front of you, you cannot see, but there are like 400 top businessmen, people from the public sector, journalists. There are like 6,000 people connected through YouTube. So big audience. This is, as you know, the largest business event in Argentina. So any final message you would like to give to the audience here in Buenos Aires today?
En el próximo año quiero visitar el norte de Argentina.
That's a good message.
Nunca he visto Jujuy, Salta, y la cultura, el carne, y la gente ahí me interesa mucho.
Probably you don't know.
Ojalá que sea posible.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Y quiero visitar Buenos Aires también, y tal vez podemos vernos en un encuentro.
That will be great, and we are looking forward to see you. Probably on a final note, I know that you have researched more than 700 restaurants across the globe. That's probably one of your topics, your favorite topics. Any restaurant that resonates with you in Argentina? Any special food?
One thing that amazes me in Buenos Aires is the quality of the pesto, and that you can get a world-class pesto better than Italy, for less than $10, depending on the currency cycle. But how good your pasta is, I think, is still underrated. Everyone talks about the meat, the cinciolines. That's all true. But your simple pastas, to me, so often are just number one of anywhere and readily available all over the city.
Tyler, your contribution to this colloquium is very much appreciated. It was great to hear your thoughts and reflections on these key topics. I really hope, as you said, we can chat again soon in Argentina, in person, within the next few months.
Nos vemos. Gracias todo.
Muchas
Chao.
gracias.